Hello, I'm the Smoking Cheddar, but I'm guessing you already knew that. So welcome to another unit build, and today we're going to be looking at a Liberty bomber. Yes. We're going to be looking at the strategic bomber. This thing, hopefully, will level bases for you. So, as always guys, make sure your headphones are in, your partner is busy watching 27 Dresses or whatever it is they're watching. Make sure you got yourself a drink of water or coffee. And maybe a snack. A snack would be good, make sure you're comfy. I have no idea how long this is going to last. It could last 20 minutes, it could potentially last less. Because, well, there's not a lot to discuss with bombers most of the time. So, we'll do what we can here. And as always, we'll look at the advanced tech. We will look at the modern tech to the halfway point. We will look at the unit attributes. We will look at how these two correspond with the parts that we can then use to further certain stats. And from there we will look at the officers and most importantly the trained skills. Then we'll give a summary at the end and we'll see how we can get this to work. Now, I have used a similar build to what I'm going to suggest here today in the past, and it does kind of work. We'll address a small problem first, and that is in September of 23, I believe, they upped the base resistance for walls when it comes to aerial damage, and I think it has been upped again since then, around July of last year possibly, give or take. So bombing a base into nothing is quite difficult. It often requires multiple runs. So what can we do in terms of bombing an enemy base? Well, there's two directions we can take this. We can either take this as a supersonic bomber, where we are just sending it out and it is doing its job in a matter of seconds and it is coming back, or we can go for a strategic bomber, which will deal a lot more damage but it'll be vastly more vulnerable. The flip side of that is you can use it in a defensive scenario with greater effect. So if your base is surrounded by an enemy army group, you can then use this bomber to absolutely smash the ground forces. So out of the two builds today, I've decided to discuss the strategic bomber, as it has multiple functions. It will be good at damaging bases, mark my words. Will it be better than the supersonic bomber? It's hard to tell, if I'm perfectly honest, and we'll get into the reasons why later on in the video. I'd like to thank Lewis, a commenter in the last video, for asking for a build on the bomber. I haven't touched air in well over 6 months, probably about 8 months at this point, so it is a nice refreshing change for myself, and I got to read up on the tech tree while I was at work today, so this is a nice break from ground pounding. So let's go and have a look at the tech tree. So with air, what we'll do is what we do with all the other trees. We'll look at the picture tech first, which is relevant, then we'll pick up the ones that are worthy of note, which I'm always assuming that you've got to the end of these tech trees with these builds, and that you're looking to perhaps advance specific areas within this without having to spend all the resources to max it out. So in order for the strategic bomber to work, we're going to need quite a few very specific things, and it's almost going to max this tree out entirely, but it is what it is. Let's have a look. So the first one we're going to look at is the picture tech here, Valkyrie. When your bombers leave the base, their speed is increased by 30% for 10 seconds. So if we're going for a supersonic build, this is absolutely brilliant. It's not too bad for the strategic bomber, because we're not really interested in being able to go particularly quickly, as the goal is to deal massive amounts of damage in a standard period of time, rather than zip there, drop a load, zip back for a fraction of the amount of damage. We're focusing here on massive amounts of damage. And at the end of the advanced tech tree, we're looking at all-weathered combat. When an Air Force troop starts a battle, firepower is increased by 5% for every second for a maximum of 25%. So this is going to play into our strategy of moving a little bit slower. Obviously, the strategic bomber is going to be up in the air a little bit longer than the supersonic bomber. So this might play into our cards a little bit better if we're increasing that interval between bomb times. Obviously we don't want to increase it too much, but we certainly don't want to decrease it past a certain point. So we want to get the most out of this. We want to get that 25% for the bomber, because that is going to absolutely give us enough leverage to use a skill damage to smash a base into nothing. So we will be looking, obviously this needs to be completed in order to advance. So obviously things like this that have to be the number 10, they are very valuable. And we've got the damage intensity, and we've got this one as well, the damage resistance. So these are definitely things that we need. We have here bomber maneuverability, which is basically a dodge mechanic. We have Air Force speed. So we could use this one, but it's not a particularly high priority for us. This is more damage resistance for the troop and the base, which is very, very important. This is bomber HP, which again will be very important for us. Now this one is much like the speed, it's 50-50. If we decrease the bombing interval and we increase the speed, we are going to not be able to capitalize on that 5% per second in combat as much as we'd like. Obviously the longer we're flying over a base for, the more amount of time we're going to have to stack that 25%. We might get an extra 1 or 2 hits in at that maximum of 25%, which is what we're really after, rather than getting maybe just one right at the end. So speed and bombing interval are not particularly big priorities unless you're looking to cap it out, but it's up to you. Bomber stability, which is quite important, although it's not as important as maneuverability. And firepower, which is also incredibly important. So we're looking at strategic bombers in the modern tree. While a bomber troop is over 50% HP, it gains 10% firepower bonus, and when it is under 50% HP, it gains a damage resistance bonus. So this is going to play very heavily into what we are going to do with this bomber, and that will become apparent when we get towards the officer construction stage. This one, VTOL, which is just before it, is extremely important. This increases the damage resist when being attacked by an enemy base. Again, we have HP, which is going to be extremely important for us. We also have firepower, again extremely important. Bomber stability is again a defensive stat. This is kind of needed, but it's not, say, as important as HP, firepower, or maneuverability. And we have Air Force HP again over here, along with Air Force firepower. Both of these are incredibly important. Let's assume that you are in fact in Silver 1, so we'll just have a look at the stats for Silver 1. You can subtract or add from this as needed. But we're already looking at 1 million in firepower versus ground, 1 million, and we're looking at 633k in HP. We're looking at a maneuverability of 102, bombing interval of 8.5. So if you think back to the end of the advanced tech tree where we're getting a 1 We're getting 5% firepower every second we're in combat. We don't really want to increase that too much, decrease that too much, as I said, because we want to get the maximum amount of firepower buff down as humanly possible. We have stability. So what is stability? Ability to maintain control when being harassed by enemy fighter planes. Now, to be perfectly honest, if you are rocking a bomber, you need a fighter, and if you don't have a fighter, you need a player online who does. So I generally don't prioritize the stability stat, because it's not something that you need to particularly worry about, as the bomber's main goal is to destroy things on the ground. The fighter's main goal is to destroy things in the air. They should be working in tandem. Obviously, if you are a solo player for whatever reason and you have literally no friends, the stability is going to be important, but as I said earlier in the video, it's not a big deal for us. The maneuverability stat, which I did emphasize as being slightly more important, or actually, to be fair, it's incredibly important in our case. The ease of controlling an airplane when attacked by an enemy fighter plane. This stat will affect the enemy's firing accuracy. It's effectively a dodge stat, so we can stack this maneuverability buff very high very fast with certain officers, and there's a lot we can do. And here, just at the basic level, it's 1 million, which is a 335k in damage with 20 shots, and of course that is over a large area, and it is blast damage. Should we put that into perspective? The Vanguard bomber of the same level is only 859k. While it is going to deal more single target damage, it is going to be not dealing as much damage to a base, trust me on this one. Now, the officers. Oh, well, this is always going to ruffle some feathers, because people absolutely hate it when I tell them certain officers suck and certain officers are good. Now, for the strategic bomber build, not the supersonic build, we're not going to be looking at certain officers. I'm sorry, that's just the way it is. What we will be looking at here is Rising Star as the captain, and El Cartero as the aide. Editor cheese here. So anyway, the video I just created and am in the process of editing is almost certainly going to be made fairly redundant to a certain degree by the fact of this new officer. So this was dropped on me this morning. I'm going to finish the edit later on today, and I will upload the video regardless, with the caveat now that there is a new coefficiency bomber officer coming, so this is going to change the build for the highest amount of coefficiency you can deal versus a base. I'll leave this on screen for a few seconds longer. You can pause it and have a look at it if you wish. This hasn't been put out in any official capacity yet, but normally we get these about a day or two ahead, so this is going to be coming fairly soon. And generally they don't change them once we've seen them. So this is the new bomber officer, Officer Dawn Strike. She's going to deal basically in excess of 1800 coefficiency damage, which, as we discuss in this build, is going to be one of the key things we're going to use in order to leverage damage on an enemy base. As we are now looking at changing that entire thing, I'm not gonna wait and re-record the whole thing. I might do another build at a later date for the Liberty Bomber, or perhaps once I've had a little bit of time under my belt with this officer, maybe I'll see if this is any good in regards to being equipped to a different bomber. We'll see how things go, but I just thought I'd leave this up because, you know, 1800 co-efficiency with a bonus of an additional 200, bringing it up to 2000 co-efficiency damage is quite significant when that's what we're looking for in terms of dealing damage towards an enemy base. And you will notice that most of this is firepower and damage intensity as well, and you do get a bonus shield, which is going to help quite heavily with your defensives when you're trying to fly over an enemy base. Now, is it going to be better on a dive bomber? Almost certainly, but I would be negligent to not let you guys know, because there's a high probability by the time you see this video that this announcement has actually gone live on social media and on other platforms, and the officer may even in fact be in the game. And I don't really want the video to come out after the fact and everyone go, hey, but there's a new officer that deals more damage. I am aware of it. No, I'm not re-recording the video. I stand by what I've said, or am saying in this video. And yes, I think this would be a good substitute for possibly El Cartero. But you don't need to. Anyway, just thought I'd add this in there. I like him. He has a cat that looks like mine, except mine's more of an asshole.
Sorry, I'll get on it right away.
So, why do we want Rising Star? This is his awakened ability. It is an upgraded tactical skill, and it increases the bombing efficiency of this officer's bombers by 20%, so we get a bonus in 20% efficiency. Additionally, each bombing run deals extra skill damage to their targets, damage coefficiency of 1700. The skill damage is reduced by 20% for each additional target. So you're hitting a base that is not reduced. That's 1700 coefficiency damage coming out of a 1 million power unit at 8.1. That's quite powerful. That's going to leave a mark on the base. That's going to leave a big stain on the base.
Huh?
Let's have a look at the other skills and see why he's more appropriate over other officers. So we have a damage intensity and a damage resistance buff. As we know, damage intensity is going to help us overcome the base's defenses, and damage resistance is going to help us resist incoming damage from the ground or from the sky. So we do need this. This goes back to what I was saying earlier about maneuverability being key to our survival, and we get a 10% plus an additional 10% cruising speed, and cruising speed is pretty much what it says on the tin. We also get a 40% firepower increase, so you should be able to see where this is going.
Grab your gear.
Now, the reason why we want El Cartero in as the aid is two reasons. One, he doesn't deal as much damage, but he does deal probably about the second most amount of skill damage out of all of the bomber officers. Yes, I know you can see who he's paired with for my current bomber, but I'm not running a Liberty bomber. That's a discussion for another time. Now, we're looking at 1350 for the skill efficiency, and we're also getting a stun time on ground units, which will come into play when you are using this unit and this build in a base defense role. Other than that, it's pretty much just a bonus. It's in the background. We're not actually after that. What we're after is the skill damage. And when he gets awakened, throws out a flaming pitch, dealing damage to each target of coefficiency of 20% of his 1350, less damage to each target, and trapping them for 2 seconds. The bombing also inflicts enemies on hit with burning damage, so we're going to deal damage over time of 100 coefficiency for 4 seconds. That's 100 coefficiency, sounds pretty low, but what you've got to remember is that's a 1 million power bomber. That's before we've put any tech on it, that's before we've put any parts on it, that's before we've even equipped the damn officers. It's 1 million out of the gate. It is a nasty piece of kit, and we're just going to give it a 4-second burn time every single time the 1350 goes off on the base, and we're going to be dealing 100 coefficiency from each of those, which is very nice indeed. We get a cruising speed buff. Again, this is going to increase our speed a little bit, but we're not too fussed too much because we can draw back on that in the tech tree. We don't necessarily need the tech for speed, but it's nice if you do decide to go down that road later on. We also have an HP buff. Again, HP is going to be quite useful for us because the bombers like to get shot at. But we also get a very high damage intensity buff of 22.5%. So this is only applied to ground force units. This is the only snag with this build. This is why I said as a strategic bomber it's not going to be potentially as good as the supersonic bomber, but it is going to deal more damage against a base in the long run, providing you can keep it in the sky. So this is key to the build. So this build relies on a specific strategy being in play, and that's the bomber not being the only thing in the sky. Please keep that in mind as we look at the trained skills. So what skills should we look at for our strategic bomber? Now, it's safe to say that firepower is already exceptionally high, and if we start stacking percentages on that, it's going to go even higher. The problem is these things are pretty vulnerable, so we should probably fix that with our trained skills. Special skills is a fantastic place to start. And it's a shield coefficiency. Again, these bombers have extremely high amounts of hit points. This coefficiency will obviously stack with the HP of the unit. So a 500 coefficiency that when the bomber's being triggered for 4 seconds is going to be, sorry, for 2 seconds every 4 seconds is going to be extremely useful, especially when you're up against fighters. This is a must have skill. Like, you should not deviate from this if you're going down the build, because this skill will keep that bomber in the sky, and the longer that bomber is in the sky and unheard, it's going to deal more damage, and that's what we want from it. We want it to absolutely lay down as much skill damage as possible. Next, we are going to go for a defensive. And we're going to go for steel resilience. This is the intercept resilience buff. So if you are a fighter player much like myself, you are probably looking at a handful of mechanics, and one of the best mechanics you're looking at is intercept. This is going to negate that output effectively, so do consider this as your secondary. So on to Cartero, and we're going to go for this balanced skill here as his first skill because it gives us firepower of 20% and HP of 20%. The HP is what we're really after, but the firepower is an added bonus. We are going to be trying to level bases after all. And for the last trained skill, we will be going for a 30% HP bonus. Now, there's two different officers you can get this from, so it doesn't really matter which one you get it from, but a 30% HP bonus is going to be absolutely amazing once you've stacked that with Old Nag's shield. So seriously guys, it's worth. So on to the parts and the reasons for them. Auxiliary systems. Now here, this is typically in the past where I would say things like we're doing a damage build, so we need to go for firepower. Everything is true in that regards for everything on the ground. In the air, the game is different. You've got to get from point A to point B without being shot at by ground and without being shot at by air, and then you've got to engage the enemy base, specifically in this case. So we're actually going to be going for the HP auxiliaries, because the bonus HP on top of what is already a very large amount of hit points is going to be very useful in surviving the bombing runs. Now it doesn't matter which and just moving on to the engine in slot 3, again we have HP and maneuverability. Both of these stats are going to be linked to our survival, and that is what you can expect to find the engine. There's no option for a different loadout here, that's just what you've got. And the same goes for slot 2 with the ball turret. You can pretty much choose what you like, but at the end of the day they've all got stability and maneuverability on them, and as we said, with stability is not that much of an issue because you should have a fighter up in the sky with you anyway, and if you don't, it is kind of a case of doesn't really matter. They're not going to actually disrupt you enough for it to make any significant difference, providing you can survive, which is where the maneuverability stat is going to come into play. And of course in slot 1, the bomb, you are going to get firepower and stability. So this is obviously going to play towards the ultimate damage output of the bomber. So what is it we have talked about today? So we've identified what we need, and that is we need a bomber that is going to be capable of leveling bases. We've added in the caveat of using it as a defensive bomber as well, to decipher whether or not we want the strategic or the hypersonic version. Now, is the hypersonic version any better? Probably not. You're going to be relying very heavily on increased intervals and increased movement speed, and that's going to come at the cost of being able to deal skill damage, and we all know skill damage is what flattens bases. It doesn't matter what you say, it's just a fact. We all know that from the siege damage artilleries and the siege damage setups for artillery. It's the same for bombers. If you want to damage an enemy, and if you want to damage an enemy base, you need the skill damage output. So this will double up as a defensive bomber, but we've really decked it out for survivability with its parts and with its trained skills. Is this going to work? Now, in the early days when Air Force was released, I did have a Liberty bomber, and I did have pretty much that set up on the go for a couple of weeks, and it was doing a lot of damage right up until they balanced a few issues. Is it doing any damage at the moment? Yes, I've seen similar builds in play, and yes, they do multi-run your base, and they do rail your base. Is this going to be a one-hit wonder? Are you going to be able to absolutely one-shot a base? No, you're not. You're still going to have to send 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 runs out to level an enemy base. But you will be dealing a noticeable amount of damage. So the whole point of this build is for it to absorb as much damage as possible, to be able to take as much damage as possible, so when your aircraft lands you can let it heal up on the aircraft on the landing strip, and then you can take it off again at maximum health, and in a dire situation you can just run it out backwards and forwards and you can take the loss. Now, if you manage to get one run out and that bomber survives and it's dealing a percentage damage, when it comes back you simply look at your base, wait for it to stop flashing green and send it again. The length of time your bomber has to heal versus the length of time the enemy base will be able to heal from your bombing run, depending on the distance of the bombing run, will vary greatly obviously, but it's going to err in your favour. Is it going to take a long while? Almost certainly. Bombing runs generally do. This, however, in a combined arms effort against an enemy base, a ground assault is already taking place and you're sitting at the back and all your units are donated, but you have one of these floating around, by all means everyone will love it when they see this thing turn up, because it will deal chunks off the enemy base. And as I said before, What we're doing here is we're leveraging very high amounts of skill damage with the natural firepower of the unit, and instead of boosting the firepower, we're boosting the HP and the survivability of the unit in order for us to survive longer in the air, so we can get more runs in without losing bombers. Of course, unlike light tanks or helicopters or MBTs or any of the other ground units, when you're on your way to fight an enemy base, you can attack the other units around you. You can't do that with a bomber. The bomber can only attack a ground target, and it can only attack the ground target once it's been assigned to that ground target, or in the case of the strategic bomber, that ground area. So it's very vulnerable between these two locations. So this is what I'm trying to mitigate for you, is the potential loss of units. Now, I find it very easy to gun these out of the sky with an interceptor. The reason being is most people don't set up their bombers correctly. They simply go with the Liberty bomber and go, hey, it deals a lot of damage. And trust me, you can put any officer on it and it will deal a lot of damage. The problem is if you're not thinking about what it is you're doing with that bomber, it will get gunned out of the sky. And if I can splash it, it's getting shot down. Now, if you make this thing more resilient and I have to chase it for a longer period of time, that gives other players who are in your alliance, or perhaps you yourself if you have a fighter, plenty of time to come and shoot down my interceptor. There's lots of different things you can do with the bombers in this game. This is only one of them. Personally, I prefer the strategic bomber build over the supersonic build. That is simply because the supersonic build's damage output is massively hit in favour of the survivability, and I don't think that's particularly good. This thing in defence will absolutely level armies. Providing you use it sensibly in a defensive role, i.e. they're attacking your base, you wait for them to start, then you hit them. That doesn't give them enough time to react with fighters, it doesn't give them enough time to react with the anti-air guns, and it's not going to give them enough time to react to move out of the way, because they're in base-to-base contact with you. They're in grid-to-base contact, they're touching your base, so they're not going to be able to get away from the initial strike. And because you're using 2 lots of skill damage per run, you're going to be able to see very heavy results very quickly. On many occasions I regret myself getting rid of the Liberty Bomber. It is a very, very, very nice unit after all. Oh, man, I regret getting rid of it some days, I really do. And that's all I really have to say on the strategic bomber. It is going to damage enemy bases. It will still take time. There's no way you could not make a bombing run on a base take more than 5 minutes. It's just the nature of the game, the amount of HP, the damage resistance of the ground target. Unless you're fighting a level 31 with this thing, you're going to be in for multiple runs. Or a freshly made level 32. Certainly if you're in the gold 3 and up bracket like I am, you're not going to be able to one hit a base, but unless it's a builder. So yeah, I think you guys are going to enjoy this. I think you guys, if you go for this build, you're probably going to see a marked difference in how your bomber performs in terms of how much damage it's dealing to an enemy base, but how it's being used defensively. These things are always hard to hit moving groups with unless they're at relatively short range, so my advice would be wait for them to stop to engage a target, then use your bomber. That's the most sensible way, and if you're dealing a lot of skill damage per run, the enemy will know about it, and they'll try and counter it, but it's a bit late once you've blown them all to bits. Anyway, a link to the Discord will be in the description box down below. You're more than welcome to come and join the Discord, but be aware of the degeneracy that goes on in there. Please be an adult about it. we all say dumb things to each other because it's Discord. We can get away with it. Keep it within the confines of legality, please, ladies. And I've been the Smoking Cheddar, and you've been very patient. Thank you for watching. I'm in the middle of an L3. No, I'm in the middle of an L4 right now, and I've got to go fight someone. I haven't slept in 3 days. Help.